Hi, everybody, and welcome to Splunk's Data Deep Dive into the Logitech McLaren G-Challenge. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Logitech McLaren G-Challenge, check out this quick video.
Let's take a look at our data-driven insight powered by Splunk.
Well, boogity, 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 it's time to go racing. As you saw, the Logitech McLaren G-Challenge is the largest sim racing competition on the planet. And Splunk is excited to be a sponsor of that awesome broadcast and program, as well as McLaren F1 and their Shadow Esports team. And I'm joined by my friend Matt. Matt, tell the folks a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Corey. G'day, guys. Matt Moore, based out of Melbourne, Australia. I'm an observability strategist here at Splunk and the resident data scientist on the team, which is a hell of a lot of fun. Today, I'm actually based temporarily out of San Francisco and enjoying the beautiful summer weather here. Thank you, Corey.
That's right. Well, we're actually here in San Francisco, actually at the Splunk office. We've been hosting this series we call the Race to .conf, which is a live racing series that's getting people excited about .conf and giving them a chance to qualify for a seat in our championship race happening at .conf next week. But we're also here because of RSA Conference, giving folks an experience with sim racing in the McLaren simulators on the floor and showing them how we've brought data to esports and sim racing using Splunk like never before. And the G Challenge is, as you saw, largest sim racing competition on the planet. And Splunk actually partnered with Logitech and McLaren to bring broadcast analytics to these racing sim competitions in a way that had never really been done before. And it was a lot of fun. We had access to 10 racers in each of the series that were the best racers in the world. And today what we're going to talk about is stock car racing, or as the folks in America would call that, NASCAR style racing, run on the iRacing platform. And we're going to give you a behind the scenes look at how did we develop the analytics that maybe you saw in the broadcasts, and then actually show you some pretty interesting things that we found in the data since then as we've continued to use it. So Matt, why don't you tell the folks a little bit about what they're seeing here and kind of what got you excited as a data geek in the G Challenge?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're looking at here is a real-time live replay of the data that we captured during the Logitech McLaren G-Challenge. Now, the thing that we noticed in both the open wheel and the NASCAR races on the track, even in these, it happens fast, right?
That's true.
So we couldn't just take a few readings from a few metrics every second or so. We had to go hard into this. So we have 300 separate metrics coming from all 10 cars coming in 10 times a second. And what that has allowed us to do, well, you're going to see in a moment. But what we're looking at here right now is that replay. We're picking up on conga lines, people using the toe effect, where people are, whether they're active, and what's going on.
That's fantastic. Well, before we get started into the deep dive of what the analytics that we provided, maybe it makes sense to go show the folks what actually showed up in the broadcast so that they get an idea of how and why we find this stuff so important.
You're right about that. We've definitely finalized the grid, but like you guys talked about earlier, things are going to look very different when we have all 10 race cars on the track there at Indy. Because as we saw there, we saw single car qualifying, but once they take to the 2.5 mile track, the draft will come into play as they race in a pack. So a draft is something that drivers use to gain position or gain some time on their lap there. So we have information as to how that's going to come into play here with this data-driven insight powered by Splunk. Luke, what can you tell us here about how the draft might come into play here at Indy?
Well, yeah, you could read the graphic for yourselves there. The difference between speed is exactly what you need. You need more top speed in a straight line, but the lap time's there. In a pack, the slowest you're doing is the quickest on your own. So 54 seconds could be the slowest when you're in a draft pack, whereas on your own, it's 54 seconds at the maximum. We saw actually a really good example earlier on in terms of what happens when you lose the toe. At Talladega, we saw Danilo Vaz in the LATAM region. As soon as he got 6-7 tenths away from the pack and wasn't able to grasp it, he was losing 1.5, 2 seconds every single lap, and that was his race over. So it is vital that you are working with someone else and getting this draft.
It absolutely is. At the end of the day, solo qualifying, it's great. You get a little bit of that raw pace in, but in the race, you're going to be looking for drivers to work with to really push up that top speed, pull down those lap times, and catch the leader. We're going to be seeing a fair bit of that here.
Absolutely, guys. Luke, much to your point, the draft can be so beneficial, but you have to have an understanding of how to use it. It's a skill, so we'll have to see which drivers have mastered that today.
Well, that is pretty cool to see that our analytics showed up in the pre-race of a broadcast that, by the way, that Logitech McLaren G-Challenge had more than 2 million views on YouTube and Twitch. So if you're not familiar with sim racing as a kind of an entertainment venue, let me just say this. Esports in general in the gaming industry is 1.5 times the size of the music industry. So you can kind of understand why people are getting excited about esports and competitions. But Matt, let's talk a little bit about what we showed there. So one of the things we talked about was this idea of the draft, or being in tow, or as you said, a conga line, or what did they say? He called it a pack. Why is that so important?
All right, so when you're driving by yourself, you're subjected to forces of aerodynamics. The wind hits the windshield, it gets stuck behind you, you slow down. When you're in the pack, someone is in front of you, it reduces that friction, you drive a little faster. And the bit that surprised me, I didn't think it was a thing, the car in front also gets a speed boost because the car behind is pushing the air up behind it. So there's this mutual benefit, this symbiosis between the cars, driving in that conga line to be able to drive up to 5 miles an hour faster.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of interesting. So what I'm curious about, though, Matt, is does that manifest in the data? Like, that's a concept that we all hear, like, you got to be in the tow. Is that something that actually shows up in the data?
That absolutely is. And as was pointed out in the video, you really need to know how to use it. And what we're looking at here is the post-race broadcast dashboard for the NASCAR sim racing. And we can see for the leaders, Logan Clambert, Nick Ottinger, and Zeke Willis in the top 5. We can see down in the bottom right, each of those has significantly higher speed when in proximity, when in the draft, than alone. Just highlighting the importance of getting that right.
Well, that's fantastic. Now, beyond being drafted here, or in the draft, driving in a line, you know, one of the things that we were kind of curious to understand is there's this old saying that rubbin's racing. If you ever watch the Days of Thunder movie, they talk about, you know, bumping cars, and that's just, you know, love taps, they call them sometimes, as a reality, because the NASCARs are pretty beefy. You know, they're not like an F1 car where the wheels are exposed and there's lightweight wings. They're big stock cars, heavy metal. So I'm curious, Matt, did you actually find, is rubbing actually racing? And if so, like, how would one determine that really?
Well, let's start with how one would determine it, and we'll come at the answer. So what we looked at was if someone has a love tap, has a bit of an incident, bumps into someone, plays dodging cars, whether they actually lose places in the next 10 seconds afterwards. So we're able to pull in the data and ask those questions. Now, the answer, and everyone's going to hate this, is sometimes. Is rubbing racing? It depends on who you are. So when we looked at the different drivers, some could get away with it better than others. Seth the Merchant, on average, lost 6 places for each incident. Trey McCricket, 0.67. So obviously he was able to better weigh the cost-benefit analysis of playing dodging cars on the NASCAR track.
Which is one thing to point out in the data set that we're getting out of iRacing here. The incident concept is basically the game records an incident if there's any tapping of another car, contact with a wall, off track where you're outside the track limits, and there's different point values. And so this is, again, another interesting metric that in context, it gets really interesting to understand kind of how it impacts race performance. Now, outside of the things that we covered in the broadcast so far, what were the things that you found most interesting as you think about the broadcast analytics?
That is going to be interesting. There is a story that played out in the data that we were not looking for originally. So we were setting out to work out the big questions. Is rubbing racing? Can you get away with it? Does the draft work? How do we use it? Now, when I started looking at this data, I wanted to ask some deeper questions. Which parts of the track are most important? Which things are important to get right? And so we followed our nose through it and were able to ask questions like, which corner is most significant from the perspective of reducing your lap times? So what we're looking at here is that analysis. And Daytona, it's an oval, right?
Mhm.
4 corners, drive around real fast, keep your foot in the throttle, don't brake very much. So I was expecting all of the corners to be fairly equal. Looking at this, corner 1, 2, and 3, we've got a negative correlation between your exit speed and your lap time. You exit fast, your lap time goes down.
Yep.
Makes sense, right?
That's exactly what you want.
Corner 4, we also have that, but we don't have that tight line showing that exiting fast definitely decreases your lap time. We got this weird fan.
Mhm.
We got something different that's going on.
Okay.
So something weird's on that track, right?
So what do you think is causing that? How would it be possible that if I don't have my exit speed's no longer tightly correlated to my lap time? That seems logical to me, that if I exit well, like we always talk about, slow in, fast out, meaning
Exactly.
exit speed is the most important thing to predict lap times. Why do you think that's happening?
So I got to admit, my first reaction was there might be a territorial flock of pigeons hiding behind corner 4 that was interfering with people, but doesn't turn up.
It was the race
esports.
fans and all their coolers. They just parked on the track. Yeah, obviously.
They're the empty tinnies. But to take a slightly more mature and realistic approach, I started looking at where things were occurring.
Mhm.
So what we're looking at here are some heat maps of driver input, speed, things like that, showing where they're occurring on the track. And Daytona, it's not a perfect oval. You got that weird little bump down the bottom.
Yeah, we call that a super speedway in NASCAR.
Okay, that's what it's called.
Yeah, it's a super speedway, classic sort of modern track design where you've moved away from the traditional perfect ovals like Indy to this broken front grade. It's designed to do some things like create some more opportunities for competitive racing.
Well, it's funny you say that, because it definitely seems to have achieved that here. You can't see it very well on the speed, but you can very faintly see there's a little bit of orange on those, that people slow down on that deviation.
Okay.
But what stood out to me is when I start looking at driver inputs, and I'm just going to go straight to brake because that's where the interesting things were happening.
Yeah.
You come out of the one anomalous, and what's happening after it? Drivers are doing, and there has to be a reason for them. So coming back to what we were looking at earlier, sorry, I'm talking a lot, but I'm excited. Coming back to what we were looking at earlier, when we saw the drivers zooming around the track and knowing that they're using the toe, they're in close together.
Yep.
And when coming to that bottom, there is something going on in the middle of it, and they need to apply inputs. They need to do something
Yeah,
different.
changing the speed. Maybe it's are they bunched?
Definitely bunched up, and they got to do something. And when they start putting those inputs in, they bunch up even more. So this is where it gets really cool. And that's probably saying a little bit too much about myself. But if we have a look at, ignoring most of the analytics in the dashboard, there's a lot going on. But these middle 2 panels show where incidents occur. So where the robbing is, where they get into love taps. And it is almost exclusively happening after that corner 4. They need to apply inputs. They put the brakes on. They bunch up. They bounce off each other.
Yeah.
So there is something going on, and it wasn't angry pigeons.
Or fans throwing tin cans, as we learned. So this is the whole idea here, folks, is that we're trying to give everybody an opportunity, one, to enrich the esports broadcast experience with great analytics, much like you see in other sports where we use data to give the fan experience and improve sort of understanding of what's going on track or in the field. But also, we wanted to find a way to help the esports and sim racing community to extract data from these platforms so that they can get better and faster, much like we do with real racing teams. And it's all, the idea is that Splunk is an incredible platform for analytics that you can use to bring data to just about anything. And in this case, it was racing. And Matt, thank you so much for showing the folks what they can do. And I will say, if you all want to get hands-on with the data, next week, in Las Vegas and virtually, we're hosting something at .conf called our Boss of Ops and Observability. Now, Boss of Ops and Observability, or as we lovingly refer to it, is a hands-on, gamified, call it capture the flag-like experience where folks will get hands-on with Splunk as well as data sets that, apply to real life. There's a lot of scenarios like FinOps and cloud monitoring that are interesting ways where you can learn to use Splunk to achieve some objectives. But Matt has been kind enough to take this data set from the Logitech McLaren G-Challenge, and as you said earlier, curate it, create a time travel to where it runs back in real life so we can replay the data. Actually have an episode for you. So if you want to get your hands on this data and do so in Splunk, sign up for the Boss of Ops and Observability happening next week. That's June 13th at 6 p.m. Pacific time. And be sure to check us out and come and play with us. Get your team of up to 4 players together. And again, you'll be able to get hands-on with the data at Boo. Also at .conf, Matt and I, as well as the rest of the Data Drivers crew here on the Observability Strategist team, are going to be some really cool McLaren experiences. We're going to have 8 racing sims throughout the week. There's going to be a full-size F1 car with some really neat augmented reality experiences that I'm jazzed for folks to see. So if you're into racing and you're into data, Splunk.conf is the place to be next week, and we encourage you to come check us out. And then also one more thing on the broadcast on these same channels you're watching this. Tomorrow, we're actually going to be hosting our final race to .conf, where, I don't know, are you racing or are you going to be my data scientist again tomorrow?
I'm going to be a data scientist. Don't put me behind the wheel ever.
It's probably better. We love the pro at data science, so that's fantastic. But we are racing tomorrow live on F1 2021 on your PC. And if you want to come race with us, you can hit the link in the show notes, and we will happily join you into our club, and you can come racing with us as well. But again, sign up for boo.com, or sign up for Boo at boo.splunk.com, and sign up for .conf happening next week in Las Vegas and virtually. And as we always say, whatever you're into, be data driven and join Data Drivers.